Do you have any idea whose blood is on that money, Marcus? Because it's not yours. It was never yours. Family is just a word, Elena. Don't get emotional. I needed a bridge and you were the strongest one I had. Besides, you're successful. You'll make it back. I'm doing you a favor teaching you that even your precious firewalls have a human back door. A favor you emptied my daughter's surgery fund and called it a lesson. Listen to me very carefully. I spent 10 years building a life you couldn't ruin. Now I'm going to spend the next 10 days making sure the world is too small for you to hide in. The line went dead with a dry mechanical click that felt like a bullet casing hitting the floor. I sat in my home office, the architectural firm I'd built from the ground up looming in the shadows around me. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago was a grid of cold, indifferent lights, but inside my chest, a furnace was roaring. My hands were steady. Architects don't succeed with shaky hands, but my skin felt electric with a pure, unadulterated rage. I looked down at my monitors. $150,000. Gone. It wasn't just a number. It was 12 years of skipped vacations, late-night blueprints, and every cent of the insurance settlement from the accident that had nearly taken my daughter's leg. It was Maya's future, her ability to walk without a limp, her chance at a life without pain. And my brother, the man I'd bailed out of jail twice, the man I'd let sleep on my sofa when he was finding himself, had treated it like a jackpot. A soft creak came from the doorway. I didn't have to turn to know it was Maya. At 12, she was already too observant, a trait she'd inherited from me that I now wished she didn't have. "Mom!" Her voice was small, but the edge of steel was there. She was wearing her oversized hoodie, her brace clicking slightly as she moved. "I heard you yelling. Was it Uncle Marcus again?" I closed the banking tab, but it was too late. She had seen the red font, the negative balance that looked like a jagged wound on the screen. "He took it, didn't he?" she asked. She didn't cry. Maya had stopped crying after the third surgery. Instead, she walked over and placed her tablet on my desk. "Maya, honey, go back to bed. I'll handle this. I promise." "You always say that," she said, her eyes meeting mine. They weren't the eyes of a child. They were the eyes of a strategist. "But you handle things like a sister. You need to handle this like an architect. Look at this." She swiped her tablet open. She had been playing a geocaching game earlier in the evening, one that used shared location pings between family members, a feature I had set up months ago for her safety. "He forgot to turn off the Find My Family sync on the old iPad he borrowed last month," Maya said, her finger pointing to a blinking blue dot on a map. "He's not in Chicago anymore. He's at a high-end terminal at O'Hare. He's waiting for a flight to New York, flight UA 2410. It leaves in 50 minutes. I stared at the screen, then at my daughter. The betrayal felt heavy, a physical weight in my lungs, but the clarity Maya provided acted like a scalpel cutting through the grief. "He thinks I'm weak," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "He thinks because we share the same parents, I'll eventually sigh, forgive him, and start over." "Are you?" Maya asked. I stood up, grabbing my coat and the encrypted drive that held every piece of financial leverage I had ever quietly collected on Marcus, just in case his bad luck ever came knocking at my door. "No," I said, my voice vibrating with a cold, predatory focus. "Marcus thinks he found a back door into my life. He forgot that I'm the one who designed the house, and I'm about to lock all the exits." I looked at the clock. 50 minutes. In Chicago traffic, that was an impossibility, but I wasn't going to the airport to plead. I was going to start a war. "Maya, call Simon. Tell him the Vance project just went into emergency demolition mode. Tell him I need the New York accounts flagged for fraud before that plane touches the tarmac." "On it," she said, her fingers already flying across the screen. As I headed for the garage, the rage didn't fade. It sharpened. Marcus didn't just steal money. He stole the one thing I valued more than my career, the safety of my child. He had turned our blood into a weapon, but he had no idea how well I could aim. The elevator ride down felt like an eternity. Each floor was a second of Marcus's life I was preparing to dismantle. By the time I reached my car, I wasn't a sister, and I wasn't just a victim. I was the architect of his ruin. The tires of my SUV screeched against the concrete of the parking garage as I tore toward the exit. Rain began to lash against the windshield, blurring the neon signs of the city into long, bloody streaks. I didn't care about the weather or the speed limits. I had 45 minutes before Marcus's plane took off, and I was going to make sure that by the time he landed at JFK, he would be stepping into a prison of his own making. My phone buzzed in the console. It was Simon, my lead systems consultant, and the only person who knew exactly how deep the Vance project files went. "Elena, I just got Maya's message." Simon's voice was tense, punctuated by the rapid-fire clicking of a mechanical keyboard. "I'm looking at the logs now. He didn't just transfer the money, Elena. He used your professional credentials to authorize the wire. He's making it look like you moved the funds to an offshore shell company." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "He's framing me for embezzlement from my own firm." "Exactly. If you report this to the police, normally they'll see your digital signature and think it's an inside job. He's been planning this for months, Elena. He's not just running, he's burying you." "Can you stop the wire?" I barked, weaving through a gap between two taxis. "I can't stop it. It's already in the clearinghouse." "But—" Simon paused, a hint of professional malice entering his tone. "I can shadow it. I can attach a tracking script to the metadata. Every time that money touches a new account, I get a ping. And more importantly, I can trigger a compliance freeze the second it hits New York." "Do it," I commanded. "And Simon, check the New York office. He's heading there for a reason. He's not just looking for a place to hide. He's looking for something else." "I'm on it. Just, Elena, be careful. If Marcus is this desperate, he's not working alone. People like him don't have the brains for this kind of digital framing. He's got a handler." I hung up the word handler, echoing in my mind. My brother was a parasite, but he had never been a predator. Someone had taught him how to sharpen his teeth. As I pulled into the cell phone waiting lot at O'Hare, I didn't go toward the departures. I knew I couldn't get through security in time to grab him by the throat. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and tapped into the airport's public Wi-Fi, not to browse, but to exploit. Marcus had always been lazy. He used the same password for everything Vance King 88, a pathetic nod to his delusions of grandeur. I bypassed his two-factor authentication by accessing his old recovery email, which was still logged into the iPad Maya had tracked. Within seconds, I was inside his flight itinerary. I didn't cancel his ticket, that would be too easy. Instead, I upgraded him. I moved him from 14B to First Class 1A. It seemed like a gift, but in the world of airline security, a last-minute high-value seat change on an account flagged for suspicious activity triggers an automatic secondary screening at the gate. "Enjoy the extra legroom, Marcus," I whispered, my eyes reflecting the blue light of the screen. "It'll be the last bit of comfort you have for a very long time." My phone chimed, a text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed in bed, Elena. Greed is a family trait. Don't make us prove it." A chill that had nothing to do with the Chicago winter crawled down my spine. They were watching my phone. They were watching me. I looked around the dark parking lot. A black sedan with tinted windows sat 3 rows back, its engine idling, exhaust ghosting into the rain. I didn't panic. I was an architect. I knew that every structure, no matter how intimidating, had a point of failure. I shifted the car into reverse. If they wanted to play follow the leader, I was happy to lead them exactly where I wanted them to go. I dialed Detective Rodriguez. He was an old friend of my late husband, a man who dealt with the shadows Marcus was now playing in. "Rodriguez," I said when he picked up, "I need a favor. I'm being followed, and my brother just stole $150,000 of my daughter's medical fund. But I don't want an arrest yet." "Elena, slow down. Where are you?" "I'm at O'Hare, but I'm leaving. I need you to pull the security footage for Terminal 3 Gate K12. Look for Marcus Vance. And Rodriguez, don't let the TSA stop him. I want him to get on that plane." "You want him to escape?" Rodriguez sounded incredulous. "No," I said, a dark smile tugging at the corner of my mouth as I watched the black sedan pull out to follow me. "I want him trapped in a pressurized metal tube at 30,000 feet for 2 hours while I dismantle his life on the ground. He thinks he's flying to freedom. He's actually flying into a cage." I floored the gas, the SUV roaring as I led the black sedan away from the airport. I had 48 hours until the banks opened in New York. 48 hours to find out who was pulling Marcus's strings and take back what belonged to my daughter. Marcus had forgotten one thing: you can't outrun the person who built the world you're trying to hide in. The black sedan was still there, a persistent shadow in my rearview mirror, as I carved through the rain-slicked streets of Rosemont. They weren't trying to hide anymore. They were maintaining a tactical distance, a psychological tether designed to keep my heart rate high. They wanted me to feel like the prey. But I wasn't running home. I was heading toward the one place where I held the home field advantage, the construction site of the new Vance and Associates skyscraper. I tapped my earpiece. "Simon, I'm 3 minutes out from the North LaSalle site. Are the perimeter feeds live?" "Live and encrypted," Simon replied, his voice a frantic staccato of keystrokes. "I've bypassed the site manager's local server. I'm feeding the drone footage directly to your dash. Elena, that sedan. It's registered to a holding company in Delaware. Apex Global Solutions. It's a front for high-level debt collection and corporate espionage. These aren't just Marcus's buddies. These are professionals." "Professional or not, they're in my house now," I said, swinging the SUV into the mud-caked entrance of the massive construction site. The skyscraper was a skeleton of steel and concrete, rising 60 stories into the foggy Chicago sky. I used my master keycard to trigger the heavy iron gates. The SUV bounced over the uneven ground, the black sedan following close behind, confident that I had cornered myself. I pulled deep into the structure, into the central staging area where the massive industrial freight elevators, the alimony hoists, were located. I killed the lights and stepped out of the car, the smell of wet cement and cold metal filling my lungs. The black sedan screeched to a halt 20 yards away. 2 men stepped out. They were dressed in expensive utilitarian gear. Not thugs, but operatives. "Elena Vance," one of them called out, his voice echoing off the concrete pillars. "Let's keep this professional. Your brother owes people who don't have a sense of humor. He used your firm as collateral. You give us the encryption keys to the offshore escrow and we walk away. You keep the car, the kid, and your life." I stepped into the dim light of a work lamp, my face a mask of cold fury. "Collateral? My brother doesn't own a single bolt in this building. He stole from my daughter. And you're trespassing on a site that has 42 active safety violations I haven't reported yet. You should be very careful where you stand." "We aren't here for a building permit, lady," the second one said, reaching into his jacket. "Simon now," I whispered. Suddenly, the site came to life. Not with light, but with sound and motion. I had programmed the automated crane systems months ago for efficiency. Now Simon used them for theater. A massive steel beam suspended by a remote-controlled crane swung violently through the air, narrowly missing the black sedan and smashing into a pile of gravel with a deafening roar. The men jumped back, their professional composure fracturing. "That was a warning," I shouted over the sudden whine of industrial sirens. "I am an architect. I know exactly how much tension this floor can hold." I know which support beams are rigged for demolition, and right now, you're standing on a hydraulic lift that I control from my phone. I held up my device. I was bluffing about the lift, but they didn't know that. In the dark, surrounded by the grinding gears of a 60-story monster, I looked like the ghost in the machine. Marcus is on a plane to New York. I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. By the time he lands, he won't have the money. I've already flagged the transfer. If you want your debt settled, you'd better hope he survives the arrival. Because if anything happens to me, or if you so much as breathe near my daughter again, the encryption keys to that money will be deleted permanently. No backup, no recovery. The first man stared at me, his eyes darting to the swinging crane and the flickering sirens. He realized then that I wasn't a victim to be intimidated. I was a liability they couldn't afford to break. "You're crazy," he spat. "I'm a mother whose child can't walk because of the money my brother just stole," I hissed. "You have no idea what crazy looks like. Get out now." They hesitated, then retreated to their car. They knew the mission had changed. I wasn't a target anymore. I was a hostage taker, and the ransom was the very money they were sent to collect. As their taillights faded into the rain, I slumped against a concrete pillar, my heart finally hammering against my ribs. "Elena, they're gone," Simon said through the earpiece. "But they're calling someone. I'm intercepting the signal. It's a New York area code, Marcus's destination." "Give me the address," I said, wiping the rain from my face. "It's not an office, Elena. It's a private pier in Brooklyn. Pier 17. I looked up at the skeletal heights of my building. Marcus wasn't just running to a new life. He was being delivered to his masters. Simon booked me on the next private charter out of Midway. I don't care about the cost. If Marcus arrives at that pier before I do, they'll kill him, and the money will vanish with him. I'm not done with my brother yet. He still has to look me in the eye when I take everything back. I walked back to my SUV, the rage now tempered into a cold, sharp blade. I had built skyscrapers. I had moved mountains of earth and steel. Tearing down one pathetic, treacherous man was going to be the easiest project of my life. The private charter was a silver needle piercing the heart of a jagged Atlantic storm. Inside the Gulf Stream, the cabin hummed with the luxury of leather and champagne, but I felt none of it. I sat hunched over my tablet, the glow of the screen etching deep lines of fury into my face. Below us, the ocean was a black abyss. Ahead, the predatory skyline of New York waited to swallow us whole. "Simon?" I barked into my satellite headset. "Tell me the rat is still in the trap." "UA 2410 is crossing the Pennsylvania border 20 minutes from its descent into JFK. Simon's voice crackled steady despite the digital chaos he was managing. "He's still in seat 1A. Elena, I've been intercepting his outbound pings. He's unraveling. He sent a message to a contact named Haley 5 minutes ago. It was short. The architect is unhinged. She's coming. Move the meeting to the pier." The architect. Marcus didn't even use my name anymore. To him, I had ceased to be a sister and had become a structural force, a nightmare of steel and logic that he couldn't outrun. "Who is this Haley?" I asked, my fingers tightening around the tablet. "Haley Vance, or at least that's the alias she uses," Simon replied. "She's Marcus's partner. According to the Delaware Shell Company filings I just cracked, she's the one who built the financial maze. Marcus provided the keys to your firm. She provided the offshore shovels to bury the loot. She's the brain, Elena. Your brother is just the blunt instrument she used to break into your life." A wave of nausea hit me, followed by a searing heat. My brother hadn't just made a desperate mistake. He had auditioned for a role in a criminal enterprise using my daughter's survival as his buy-in. "I'm landing at Teterboro in 15..." I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. I need a car waiting something fast and untraceable. And Simon, trigger the premium service for our guest in first class. At that moment, 30,000 feet above the coast, Marcus was likely leaning back in his oversized seat, dreaming of a New York getaway. He had no idea I had used my corporate security bypass to send a priority red alert to the lead flight attendant's system. The message flagged the passenger in 1A as a high-risk individual carrying an unauthorized device capable of interfering with cockpit avionics. I watched the live data feed. I saw Marcus try to access his hidden backup account to move another $50,000 money he thought was invisible to me. Access denied. He tried again, his digital signature radiating panic. Account restricted. Then Simon threw the kill switch. Every screen in the first-class cabin suddenly flickered and turned a violent blood red. Across every monitor, in cold white letters, a single sentence appeared. "Where is Maya's surgery money? Marcus." Simon relayed the audio from a hacked device. I heard Marcus's voice rise into a shrill, hysterical scream. "What is this? Help, I'm being hacked." "Air marshals are moving in," Simon reported. "They're detaining him in his seat. He's officially a person of interest before he even touches the tarmac." "Good," I whispered. "Let him realize there is no away far enough to hide." The plane touched down at Teterboro with a jolt. I was out of the door before the stairs were fully deployed. A black SUV was idling on the tarmac. "Brooklyn," I told the driver. "Pier 17. Drive like your life depends on it." As we sped toward the Lincoln Tunnel, my phone screamed. It was Marcus. "Elena, you psychopath. The police were waiting. They took everything. They treated me like a terrorist." "You are a terrorist, Marcus," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "You held my daughter's future for ransom. You're lucky it was only the police. If I were there, you wouldn't be standing." "You think you've won? Haley is waiting at the pier. You unfreeze those funds now, or I'll wipe the drive. You'll never see a cent." "Then start digging, Marcus," I replied, watching the tunnel lights strobe across my face. "Because I'm 10 minutes away, and I'm not coming to talk. I'm coming to collect." The Brooklyn waterfront was a graveyard of industrial ambition, a landscape of rusting iron and rotting wood that smelled of salt and stagnant oil. Pier 17 loomed out of the fog like a skeletal finger pointing toward the dark Atlantic. I stepped out of the SUV, the freezing wind whipping my coat. Across the East River, the Manhattan skyline looked like a distant glittering dream, one I no longer belonged to. "Simon, I'm on site," I whispered into my earpiece. "Do you have the thermal feed?" "Barely." Simon's voice was distorted by the shipping containers. "I've hacked the port's grid. There's a high-end sedan at the end of the pier, 2 signatures inside, 1 outside. And Elena." A yacht just pulled up to the deep water edge. "It's a private extraction. If Marcus gets on that boat, that money is gone forever." I gripped the cold metal of a guardrail. I didn't hide. I walked straight down the center of the pier, my silhouette framed by the flickering amber lights of the loading docks. As I approached the sedan, the door opened. A woman stepped out dressed in a tailored wool coat that cost more than my mortgage. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a lethal, perfect bun. Haley Vance. "You're late, Elena," she said, her voice smooth and devoid of warmth. "But I suppose the architect likes to make an entrance." "Where is he?" I asked, stopping 10 feet away. The back door opened and Marcus stumbled out. He looked pathetic. His suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, clutching a silver briefcase like a life preserver. When he saw me, his face twisted into cowardly defiance. "Give her the codes, Elena," he shouted, his voice cracking. "They're going to kill me. Give them the codes and we can all go home." Your blood is already on your own hands, Marcus, I said, my voice cutting through the wind like a blade. I didn't come to save you. I came to give you one last chance to be a human. Give me the briefcase. Walk away. Haley laughed a sharp metallic sound. Marcus was the one who pitched the idea, Elena. He told me his sister was a soft touch, with a fortune in a low-security medical trust. He even gave me the floor plans to your office. The betrayal hit me harder than the cold. My own brother had mapped out my sanctuary for a stranger to loot. Is that true, Marcus? I asked, my voice trembling with a rage so pure it felt like ice. Marcus looked at the ground, his silence a screaming confession. The yacht is leaving in 5 minutes, Haley said, stepping closer. If the $150,000 isn't unfrozen by then, Marcus doesn't get a seat. He gets a concrete anchor. Is your pride worth his life? I pulled out my phone. I didn't look at the banking app. I looked at Marcus. You told her I was a soft touch, I said, my thumb hovering over the screen. You forgot that architects know exactly where to hit a structure to make it collapse. Simon now. Trigger the demolition protocol. Suddenly, Haley's phone screamed with notifications. Inside the sedan, the dashboard lights began to strobe. What are you doing? Haley hissed. I didn't just freeze the money, Haley, I said, a dark smile spreading across my face. I turned the transfer into a beacon. Right now, the FBI is receiving a real-time GPS ping from every device linked to that account, including yours, and the yacht's. The distant wail of sirens began to rise from the streets of Brooklyn. You bitch! Marcus screamed. You killed us both. No, Marcus, I said, stepping forward. I just filed for a permanent eviction. You're not family anymore. You're just a line item in a police report. The pier was suddenly flooded with light. Police cruisers roared onto the asphalt, boxing in the sedan. I stood perfectly still as officers tackled my brother to the wet ground. I walked over to the silver briefcase Marcus had dropped. I picked it up, the keys to everything they had stolen. Elena, wait! Marcus sobbed as they cuffed him. I'm your brother. I didn't look back. I looked at my phone. A message from Maya. Is it over, Mom? I took a deep breath, the salt air stinging my throat. Not yet, Bug, I typed back. But the trash has been taken out. The flashing blue and red lights of the NYPD cruisers turned the fog into a rhythmic pulsing bruise. I stood by my SUV, the silver briefcase, sitting on the bumper like an unexploded bomb. 10 feet away, my brother was being pressed against the hood of a car, his face distorted by the cold metal and the realization that his sister's softness was a myth. Elena, you can't let them do this, Marcus shrieked. Tell them it was a mistake. We were just settling a family debt. I didn't answer. If I opened my mouth, I was afraid I wouldn't stop screaming. Instead, I watched Detective Rodriguez approach, his heavy boots crunching on broken glass. You okay, Elena? He asked. That GPS stunt was a hell of a move. The FBI is already intercepting the yacht. I'm not okay, I said, my voice sounding hollow. But I have the drives. That's all that matters. It's not all, he countered, gesturing toward Haley. These people are pros. We found forged IDs in the sedan. Your brother wasn't just a partner, he was their scout. He's been hunting people like you, people who trusted him, and bringing them to Haley. A fresh wave of ice water hit my veins. A scout. Marcus had been predatory, scouting his own blood. I need to see the drives, I said, reaching for the briefcase. It's evidence now, Elena. We need to... I built the encryption they're using, I snapped. If your texts touch those drives without the handshake protocol, the data self-destructs. You want that $150,000 back, or do you want to explain to a judge why the evidence turned into digital dust? Rodriguez sighed and stepped back to shield me from view. 5 minutes. Stay off the internet. I popped the latches. The briefcase held 3 high-density drives and a ruggedized laptop. I booted the system, my fingers flying with muscle memory. System check access granted. I didn't look for the money first. I looked for the audit trail. I wanted to see exactly when my brother had died and this monster had taken his place. The logs didn't lie. It hadn't started with the $150,000. It began 18 months ago. Small transfers, 500 here, 1,000 there. He had been skimming from my firm's payroll for over a year. He had watched me struggle to pay bills and fret over Maya's therapy, all while taking his cut. A notification pinged an encrypted message from an outside relay. Haley, is the architect secured? The buyer is waiting. We need the final security bypass for the LaSalle project. My breath hitched. They weren't just after my money. They wanted the security back doors to my skyscraper in Chicago. Marcus hadn't just robbed me. He had sold the safety of every future tenant in my building. Elena, time's up, Rodriguez said, placing a hand on the laptop. I looked up at him, my eyes burning. He didn't just take the money, Rodriguez. He sold the blueprints for LaSalle. I turned to look at Marcus as they led him to the transport van. For a split second, his bravado vanished. He looked like the little boy who used to hide behind my skirt. I had to... he yelled. They said they'd kill me. I thought you'd never find out. I have nothing because of you, I screamed back. You're not my brother. You're a structural defect. The van door slammed shut. I turned back to the laptop. The money was recoverable, but the war had shifted. The buyer had a piece of my work. Simon, I whispered into my earpiece. Initiate a total structural redesign for LaSalle. If they have the prints, we make them obsolete by morning. That will cost millions, Simon cautioned. I don't care, I said. If the foundation is rotten, you tear it down and start again. Marcus was the rot. The flight back to Chicago was not a victory lap. It was a tactical retreat into a war room. I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent the 4-hour flight staring at the glowing blue lines of the LaSalle skyscraper's digital blueprints. Every beam, every elevator shaft, every security sensor now felt like a compromised secret. Elena, you're pushing yourself into a breakdown. Simon's voice crackled through my laptop speakers. He was sitting in my office, surrounded by empty coffee cups and flickering monitors. We've successfully re-encrypted the primary vault. The $150,000 is being moved back into Maya's trust as we speak. We won. We didn't win, Simon, I hissed, my eyes bloodshot. Marcus sold the master key logic. The buyer, whoever they are, doesn't want the money. They want the building. They want to be able to walk through the front door of a 60-story tower and disappear into the systems. I have to redesign the entire security spine before the concrete sets on the 50th floor. You're talking about a complete architectural overhaul in 72 hours, Simon countered. It's impossible. Nothing is impossible when you're fueled by spite, I snapped. I arrived at my apartment at 4 a.m. The air was frigid, the kind of Chicago cold that felt like it was trying to crack your bones. I let myself in quietly, but as soon as the door clicked, a light turned on in the kitchen. Maya was sitting at the table, a glass of milk in front of her. She looked exhausted, her face pale under the harsh fluorescent light. Did you get it back? She asked. I walked over and knelt beside her chair, taking her small, cold hands in mine. I got it back, Bug, every cent. Your surgery is staying on the schedule. She didn't smile. She just looked at me with a profound, terrifying maturity. And Uncle Marcus, is he coming back? No, I said, my voice hardening. He's never coming back. He made a choice, Maya. He chose people who hurt us over the people who loved him. In our world, that's a structural failure. We have to remove the part that's broken so the rest of the house doesn't fall down. Maya nodded slowly. I made you something while you were gone. She handed me a new comic panel. It wasn't a superhero story this time. It was a drawing of a bridge. One side was solid stone, that was us. The other side was made of sand, that was Marcus. In the middle, the bridge had snapped. I'm glad he's gone, she whispered. He made the floor feel like it was moving even when I was standing still. I hugged her, my heart breaking for the childhood my brother had stolen. I saw her off to bed, then went straight to my home office. I didn't change my clothes. I didn't eat. I opened the encrypted drive I had taken from the pier. I began to dig into the buyer's metadata. Who was so desperate for the LaSalle blueprints that they would hire a high-end predator like Haley and a low-life scout like Marcus? The trail was buried deep under layers of VPNs and ghost servers. But Marcus had made one final stupid mistake. He had saved a voice memo on the drive, a recording of a meeting he'd had at a bar in Chicago 2 weeks ago. I pressed play. The background noise was loud clinking glasses, a jukebox playing jazz, but the voices were clear. The sister is the only problem, a deep, gravelly voice said. It wasn't Haley. It was a man I recognized. She's smart, but she's obsessed with that kid, Marcus's voice replied, sounding eager and desperate. Once I drain the accounts, she'll be too busy dealing with the bank and the hospital to notice the changes in the LaSalle server. By the time she looks up, you'll have full administrative access. And the payout? $2 million, the man said. Once the building is accessible, the second half clears. I froze. The voice, the gravelly tone belonged to Robert Sterling, my lead investor, the man who was funding the LaSalle project. He wasn't just investing in the building. He was paying my brother to help him sabotage it so he could take full control of the firm and the intellectual property behind my security designs. It was a hostile takeover from the inside out. Simon, I whispered, my hand shaking as I dialed his number. I found the buyer. It's Sterling. What, Elena, that's suicide. He owns the land. He owns the permits. He owns the shell. I said, a cold, predatory smile finally touching my lips. But I own the soul. If he wants a war for the Vance legacy, I'm going to give him one. But first, I'm going to let him think he's winning. I looked at the blueprints again. I wasn't going to redesign the security spine anymore. I was going to rig it. If Sterling wanted a back door into my building, I would give him one, but it would lead straight into a digital trap that would strip his entire empire bare. Marcus was the scout, Haley was the muscle, but Sterling was the architect of this misery. And as I had told my brother, I'm the only one who knows how to make this house come crashing down. The sun rose over Lake Michigan, casting a pale, sickly light through my office windows. I hadn't moved in 3 hours. The voice memo looped in my head, Marcus's eager betrayal, Sterling's cold calculation. They hadn't just targeted my money. They had targeted my legacy. Elena Sterling is moving, Simon said, his voice ragged from exhaustion. He just initiated an emergency audit of the LaSalle server. He's using the back door Marcus provided to overwrite your administrative privileges. Let him, I said, eyes fixed on the code scrolling across my screen. He's like a burglar who thinks he's found the master key, unaware that I've already moved the walls of the house around him. I spent the next 6 hours creating a mirror server. To Sterling, it would look like he was successfully seizing control of the skyscraper's security. In reality, every command he entered was being logged, time-stamped, and mirrored onto a secure drive I had already shared with Detective Rodriguez and the SEC. My phone buzzed. It was Sterling. I took a deep breath, smoothing the anger out of my voice until it was as polished as marble. "Robert," I said, answering. "I was just about to call you. I've had a bit of a family crisis." "I heard, Elena." Sterling's voice was like velvet over gravel. "Terrible business with your brother. I hope the firm isn't compromised. My investors are getting nervous about the LaSalle timeline." "The firm is stable," I lied, watching him on my monitor as he attempted to bypass my secondary firewall. "In fact, I'm heading to the site now to finalize the security handover. I want to make sure you have everything you need to feel secure." "That's my girl," Sterling said, the condescension dripping from every word. "Meet me in the penthouse at noon. Let's put this Vance drama behind us." I arrived at the LaSalle site an hour later. The skyscraper was a hive of activity, but to me it felt like a hollow shell. I took the lift to the 61st floor. The wind howled through the open steel frame, the city spread out below like a map of my own life. Sterling stood at the edge, looking out over the horizon. "Elena, betrayal is an exhausting thing, isn't it?" "It is," I said, walking to a makeshift desk, holding a laptop. "But I've found that the best cure for exhaustion is clarity. I know about the 2 million, Robert. I know about the voice memo Marcus recorded." Sterling turned slowly, a thin smile on his face. "Marcus was a weak link. Cheap but useful. He gave me the access I needed to realize that you, Elena, are a liability. You care too much about integrity. I care about the bottom line." "The bottom line is that you just used a stolen key to access a federal-grade server," I said. "I didn't stop you because I wanted the logs to show intent." Sterling laughed. "Intent, I own this site. I've already filed a report stating that you were the one embezzling funds using Marcus as a scapegoat. By tomorrow, you'll be in a cell." "You missed one thing, Robert," I whispered. "You studied my blueprints, but you didn't study me." I hit a single key on my phone. Suddenly, the site's lights flickered and died. The crane stopped. Below, the digital boards began scrolling with Sterling's private offshore details and the audio of my brother pitching the sabotage. "What is this?" Sterling hissed. "A broadcast," I said. "Every investor and federal agent in Chicago just received the same feed. You didn't break into my system, Robert. I led you into a spotlight." Sirens began to wail in the distance. Sterling looked down at the street, then back at me with desperate rage. "You'll lose everything," he screamed. "Let it burn," I said, backing toward the lift. "I'm an architect. I can always build something better. But you're just a tenant in a house that's about to be demolished." The industrial lift descended like a falling guillotine, leaving Sterling screaming into the wind 60 stories above. By the time I hit the ground floor, the construction site was no longer a place of creation. It was a crime scene. Blue strobes bounced off the glass panels, and I saw Detective Rodriguez stepping out of an unmarked car flanked by men in windbreakers with FBI stenciled in yellow across the back. "Elena," Rodriguez called out, intercepting me before I could reach my SUV. "We got the feed, every bit of it. The data packet you sent was enough to freeze Sterling's assets before he could even reach for his phone." "Is it enough to bury him?" I asked, my voice raw. I was shaking, the adrenaline finally ebbing and leaving a hollow, aching fatigue in its wake. "With the conspiracy to commit corporate espionage and the evidence of him paying off your brother, he's looking at 20 years minimum," Rodriguez said, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. "But we need the original drive from your office, the one with the raw audio of Marcus." "Simon has it," I said, leaning against my car. "He's waiting for you." I looked up at the skyscraper. It was a monument to my ambition, but now it felt tainted. Every floor was haunted by the fact that the man who paid for the steel had tried to use it as a cage for me. "What about Marcus?" I asked. Rodriguez's expression softened. He's been moved to a federal holding cell in New York. He's singing Elena, trying to trade information on Haley's handlers to get his sentence reduced. But the DA isn't interested in deals, not after seeing what he did to your daughter's trust. I didn't feel relief. I felt a profound sense of mourning for a brother who had died long before the handcuffs were slapped on his wrists. I drove to my mother's house in silence. The suburbs were a stark contrast to the jagged neon chaos of the city. When I pulled into the driveway, Maya was already at the door. She didn't wait for me to get out. She ran to the car and threw her arms around my waist. "Is the bad man gone, Mom?" she whispered into my coat. "He's gone, Bug," I said, stroking her hair. "The building is safe. Everything is safe. Does this mean we can have the surgery now? Next week, I promised, just like we planned." That night, after Maya fell asleep, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. My phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "I'm sorry, Elle. I just wanted to be like you. I just wanted to be a winner for once." I stared at the screen. It was Marcus, likely using a smuggled phone or a lawyer's device. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry anymore. I just felt a weary clarity. "You were never a loser because of what you lacked, Marcus," I typed back. "You were a loser because of what you were willing to trade. You traded us, and now you have nothing left to swap." I blocked the number. I spent the rest of the night working with Simon. We weren't defending anymore. We were auditing. We went through every single line of code in the LaSalle project, scrubbing out the rot Sterling and Marcus had planted. It was tedious, grueling work, but with every deleted file, I felt a little more of my own soul coming back. "Elena," Simon said over the link, his voice sounding lighter than it had in days. "The Board of Investors just held an emergency meeting. They've voted to remove Sterling and appointed you as the interim CEO of the entire development group. They want you to finish the tower." "Tell them I'll finish it," I said, looking out at the dark trees of the suburbs. "But on one condition. The building is being renamed." "To what?" "The Maya Tower," I said, "because it's built on something a lot stronger than Sterling's money." As I closed my laptop, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't building for a client or for a legacy. I was building for the one person who had stood by me when the foundation cracked. The architect had survived the collapse. Now it was time to see what I could build on the cleared ground. The morning of Maya's surgery arrived with a quiet, crystalline grace. The hospital corridors were hushed, smelling of antiseptic and hope. I sat by her bed, holding her hand as the nurses prepared the IV. For the first time in weeks, my phone was silent. There were no alerts, no threats, and no crumbling foundations. "Are you scared, Mom?" Maya asked, her eyes searching mine. "Not anymore," I said, and for the first time I meant it. I realized that fear is just a lack of data, and I have all the data I need now. "You're going to be perfect." As they wheeled her away, she gave me a small, determined thumbs up. I stood there until the double doors swung shut. Then I walked to the waiting room and looked out at the Chicago skyline. In the distance, the skeletal frame of the Maya Tower, formerly LaSalle, was draped in a massive banner bearing its new name. It was no longer a monument to corporate greed. It was a testament to a mother's fury and a daughter's resilience. Simon joined me an hour later, carrying 2 cups of cafeteria coffee. "Sterling's plea deal was rejected this morning," he said softly. "The judge saw the evidence of the security sabotage. He's going to New York to join Marcus. They can be cellmates in the house of cards they built." I took a sip of the bitter coffee. Marcus reached out again, through a chaplain this time. "He wants me to visit." "Will you?" I looked at the crane atop my building, slowly rotating against the blue sky. "Maybe in a year, or 10, but right now I have a different project. I'm building a world where Maya doesn't have to look over her shoulder. That requires my full attention. The surgery lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of pacing, of sketching in my notebook, of realizing that the most important structures aren't made of steel. They're made of the boundaries we set and the people we protect. When the surgeon finally emerged, he was smiling. The reconstruction was a total success, Elena. She'll need physical therapy, but she'll walk without a limp. The foundation is solid. I leaned against the wall, a single hot tear finally escaping. It wasn't just the money that had saved her. It was the refusal to let a predator define our future. Weeks later, I took Maya to the top of the tower. She was on crutches, but she was standing tall. We stood on the observation deck, the wind whipping our hair. I looked down at the city and then at my daughter. "You did it, Mom," she said, leaning her head against my arm. "We did it, Bug," I replied. I realized then that family isn't a debt you're born with. It's a trust you earn. Marcus and Sterling had tried to use my blueprints to destroy me, but they had forgotten the most basic rule of architecture. The strongest structures are the ones that have been tested by the storm and remained standing. I am Elena Vance. I am a mother, a survivor, and an architect. And my story is no longer about the people who tried to break me. It's about the house I built on the ground where they fell. Chapter 10. The Blueprint of a New Life. The morning of Maya's surgery arrived with a quiet, crystalline grace. The hospital corridors were hushed, smelling of antiseptic and hope. I sat by her bed, holding her hand as the nurses prepared the IV. For the first time in weeks, my phone was silent. There were no alerts, no threats, and no crumbling foundations. "Are you scared, Mom?" Maya asked, her eyes searching mine. "Not anymore," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. I realized that fear is just a lack of data, and I have all the data I need now. "You're going to be perfect." As they wheeled her away, she gave me a small, determined thumbs up. I stood there until the double doors swung shut. Then I walked to the waiting room and looked out at the Chicago skyline. In the distance, the skeletal frame of the Maya Tower, formerly LaSalle, was draped in a massive banner bearing its new name. It was no longer a monument to corporate greed. It was a testament to a mother's fury and a daughter's resilience. Simon joined me an hour later, carrying 2 cups of cafeteria coffee. "Sterling's plea deal was rejected this morning," he said softly. "The judge saw the evidence of the security sabotage. He's going to New York to join Marcus. They can be cellmates in the house of cards they built." I took a sip of the bitter coffee. Marcus reached out again, through a chaplain this time. "He wants me to visit. Will you?" I looked at the crane atop my building, slowly rotating against the blue sky. "Maybe in a year, or 10. But right now, I have a different project. I'm building a world where Maya doesn't have to look over her shoulder. That requires my full attention." The surgery lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of pacing, of sketching in my notebook, of realizing that the most important structures aren't made of steel. They're made of the boundaries we set and the people we protect. When the surgeon finally emerged, he was smiling. "The reconstruction was a total success, Elena. She'll need physical therapy, but she'll walk without a limp. The foundation is solid." I leaned against the wall, a single hot tear finally escaping. It wasn't just the money that had saved her. It was the refusal to let a predator define our future. Weeks later, I took Maya to the top of the tower. She was on crutches, but she was standing tall. We stood on the observation deck, the wind whipping our hair. I looked down at the city and then at my daughter. "You did it, Mom," she said, leaning her head against my arm. "We did it, Bug," I replied. I realized then that family isn't a debt you're born with. It's a trust you earn. Marcus and Sterling had tried to use my blueprints to destroy me, but they had forgotten the most basic rule of architecture. The strongest structures are the ones that have been tested by the storm and remained standing. I am Elena Vance. I am a mother, a survivor, and an architect. And my story is no longer about the people who tried to break me. It's about the house I built on the ground where they fell. Here is a shorter, punchy version in American English. The bottom line is this: life's tough, and sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who let us down. Don't let your kindness become a weakness. It's okay to be a good person, but you've got to draw a line and protect what's yours. When things get messy, don't just give up. Stay sharp, find your footing, and build something better. At the end of the day, your own grit is the only foundation that won't ever fail you. Thanks for listening to the story. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and drop a comment below to let me know what you think. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on our next stories. Catch you in the next one.